I'm Max Fortin, and my objects are three Native American ash baskets and a quill box. My parents have been longtime collectors of Native American baskets and artwork, so that's just something I grew up with and had always just an interest in is Native American craft work. So naturally, I just decided for choosing an object for this exhibit gravitates toward something I'm familiar with and have an interest in. I think they kind of are representative of the larger story of how the Iowa people were able to adapt to the changing times. I mean, by the late 19th century, much of their land and their way of life was gone. Much of their culture was being suppressed, and making baskets and other objects for the tourist trade was a way for them to keep alive a part of their culture and keep this tradition alive. I mean, it wasn't a different form than what it had been before, but it was nonetheless these skills, this knowledge was still being passed down and being kept alive.
Hi, my name is Kyla Cools, and my objects for this exhibition are a woven lauhala hat and a hand-carved wooden hat form. I chose this piece because recently I've become really interested in pursuing my own ethnic backgrounds, and if you couldn't tell by the Hawaiian hat, I am Hawaiian. It's not something that was really ingrained in my life when I was younger, so just finding a piece that came from across an ocean was something that I personally just became really attached to upon seeing it, realizing this is something that I could be a part of. I just remember hearing stories about my grandfather who passed away when I was about 5, but one of my favorite stories that my mother would always tell me was about how he used to weave baskets. There's a story she used to tell us about how he wove a basket from a tree that was in a sacred cemetery, so our little Hawaiian elves, they're called menehune, they came around and started bugging him until he put the basket back. So that's just kind of what drew me to a woven product in the first place. A hala is a type of tree, and the word for leaf in Hawaiian is lau, so to use the leaf of the hala tree, you call it a lauhala, and that requires you cutting the spiny, pokey edges off of the leaf. Then you have to break it into strips of the desired size you want, and then you have to put it over a fire to dry it out, and then lay it out to cure and dry in the sun, and after that, only then can you actually start to weave with the product itself. So it's a really time-consuming process. So as these materials like cotton and leather were introduced to the islands, weaving began to take on a different place in Hawaiian culture. It started to become practiced less and less, and right now there's an estimate that only about 10% of Native Hawaiian families actually still practice weaving, and when they do, it's to make trinkets like hats or bracelets or baskets that can be sold to tourists. So I just really thought it showed the changing nature of work over time and how interaction with different cultures can influence that.
I'm Christine Scales, and I chose the photograph Carnival Worker with Attitude by Frank Paulin. I was kind of taken by this piece the second I saw it. It has kind of like almost like a hypnotizing quality to it. You want to know more about this figure, and he just has this kind of essence of cool, and he just kind of really draws you in. And then I thought the ideas of work as something that we don't always think of as work. You know, we go to the carnival to have fun, we go to the carnival when we're not working, and then this picture kind of makes you think about that in a different way. Carnival work, as I kind of researched it, is really interesting. There's kind of a complex society behind it. They kind of look at themselves as like almost a band of misfits, and this is a place where they can fit in and belong, and they're kind of outsiders, but they like that. They kind of revel in that. So within the carnival there's all these traditions, and there's like a hierarchy, and there's like even the secret language. So it's just a really interesting kind of line of work. It was a piece of street photography, so it's a candid moment in this person's life, and you just get kind of a little snippet of it. But it's such a like beautiful little snippet, and it's so well. The composition is so nice, and everything is kind of so perfectly in line that it's just kind of a fascinating snapshot. It doesn't try to tell a story, but it invites a story. You look at the carnival worker and you want to know more about him, you want to know about his life and his work. So I think it kind of tells his life story without telling it at all. It kind of lets you tell it.
Hi, I'm Josh Bertolet, and I chose Luis Alfonso Jimenez's Steelworker. I chose this piece not only because I thought it really romanticized the idea of work, but I also thought it was just beautiful all around. I come from a lower to middle class family. Both my parents are blue collar workers. So it relates to them, it makes me think of them. Their idea of how hard they work and their pride in what they do. It's something that they taught me and something that I plan on even taking into my white collar education work. Jimenez was a big proponent of the idea of this iconic working American. They're basically the unsung heroes of the America we see today. And I think that it's important to include that in this exhibition, because if people aren't exposed to that idea, I mean, it's always an underlying theme with America as a whole, but I think that it really depicts just that proud, hardworking American. I knew nothing about lithography before I started this little project, and I found that it is super interesting. The amount of time that goes into creating such a piece like that, the layers and the way they blend together as you roll them on with stone. I think that also speaks to the idea that blue collar work isn't easy. So he chose a medium that isn't easy to do. It's not paint on a paper. It's not colored pencil, watercolor. It's something that he had to etch into stone and wipe and reflect, and it took hours upon hours to do that.
So I'm Megan Hall, and my pieces are 3 photographs by the Galloway Company. I chose these 3 photographs because I remember in 4th grade learning about the copper mining industry in Michigan, and I have an archaeology background, and Great Lakes copper has been something that is found in numerous archaeological sites across the United States. So it's always been, even in prehistory, a big deal. So the fact that we had 3 photographs kind of depicting the mining industry at the turn of the century was just really interesting to me. These photographs seem to try to actually depict mining in the copper mines. They're stock photographs from the company, so they would be photos that would be available for use in textbooks and things like that. So they were really trying to capture what is mining and just show examples of that. So there are 3 different scenes from kind of the mining process. When you put the photographs together, you do get a sense of the different stages in the copper transportation to the outside world. The first photograph is kind of the beginning of copper mining, where they're taking down loose rock after they used explosives to expand the shafts. And then the second photograph is them actually transporting the carts full of the ore to the skips that take them to the surface. And so that's kind of like the medium point in the transition. And then the last photograph is in the smelter where they pour pure copper after they've purified the copper, because it's originally only, the ore is like 5% copper, so they have to go through a whole process to make it into pure copper, and then they pour it into molds and they can ship it off in that form.
Hi, I'm Sydney Richards, and I'm going to be speaking about the photograph by E.O. Hope, Ford Factory, Detroit, Michigan. I chose this piece because I am taking a photography class right now, and I was interested in looking at photography in terms of work, and the FSA really kind of resonated with me, so I kind of started from there. But then I noticed with the other pieces that we had in the exhibit, there wasn't much about the environment of work, so I thought it would be important to include something about that. It is an actual environment of work. It's the Ford factory. No workers are present in the picture, which really shows the enormity of the automobile industry when it was taken in 1926. And it's a really important part of Michigan industry and American working environments as well, because it was very innovative for its time, especially within the assembly line. Henry Ford really reinstated this really innovative way of creating work. It really says something about American industry and how really innovative it was at that time. And it's one of the only places like that in the world, and Michigan should really be proud of it. And that's how we got our foot on the ground in terms of global enterprise.